Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well. I'm Alex Chisnall from the Festival of Enterprise. I am joined here today by Paul, who is going to be talking about furlough, redundancy, and restructure. So Paul Scope is going to host this webinar. He's going to talk us through his slides first of all, and then going to open it up for Q&A. So just to give you a little bit of background, so Paul's going to look at other workforce challenges created by the current lockdown, including how businesses can consider redundancy and restructuring for the future. He's currently advising clients on a range of employment issues, as you probably imagine, in relation to coronavirus, including furloughing employees and the government's coronavirus job scheme. So Paul's an experienced employment lawyer. He deals with all aspects of contentious and non-contentious employment issues. He's got a great deal of experience conducting cases before Employment Tribunals, Employment Appeal Tribunal, and the Central Arbitration Committee. Regularly advising clients on managing trade union issues and collective consultation obligations as well. So Paul is in a good place to answer many of your questions, clearly. We've had a whole bunch of questions already. We're hoping that Paul's presentation here will answer some of those more general ones for you. Obviously, some of them are going to be a little bit more specific, and Paul's going to have the time to stay around and answer some of your questions as well. So without further ado, I'm going to share your screen, Paul, with your presentation, Furlough, Redundancy and Restructure, and I will hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. As Alex said, I'm Paul, and I'm going to talk you through this seminar today, just talking about the furlough scheme, and also how that then interacts with redundancy and restructure. I hope everyone's sitting comfortably. I'm joining you from Ward Hadaway's sunny Whitley Bay office. I'm looking out my window now, and it's a lovely day. So hopefully it's a lovely day wherever you are, and you get a chance to go outside at some point, maybe just into your garden or something. So, okay, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about furlough, and then how that impacts on redundancy and restructuring. And restructuring in this context, I'm talking about employees and workforce restructuring, not obviously restructuring the finances of a business. So let's set the scene here. Obviously, we are now in a pretty much imposed lockdown. There are reasons you can leave the house, and of course, people can go to work as a legitimate reason to leave the house, but the vast majority of workplaces are closed, at least in part, and lots are closed fully. So back on the 23rd of March, the government announced the furlough scheme, and it's changed a few times since then. The latest guidance actually changed on Saturday evening. So myself and my colleagues have been busy advising some clients in the period between Saturday and now, just in terms of how the scheme has changed. In broad terms, then, let's look at what the scheme is. Essentially, because so many workplaces have to close, or are closing because it's the responsible thing to do, or there are people who can't come to work for various reasons, the government announced this scheme whereby they would pay, and it's on that third point there, 80% of gross monthly salary. Now that's capped at £2,500 a month, so £30,000 annual amount, and that means 80% of someone's salary being £30,000, someone on about 37,500, that equals 80% of their salary. The scheme is going to last for 3 months from 1st of March. Now, clearly that means it was backdated. And in terms of what you can include, again, it's set out there, it's the £2,500, but on top of that, employer national insurance contributions on that amount, and employer pension contributions, again, on that amount. So what that means essentially is if you are paying someone 100% of salary, you wouldn't claim back the employer NICs or the pension costs on that extra 20%. What can be included? I'm going to talk about that in a bit more, but essentially it's contractual payments. So it's wages, it is past overtime, it is things that you contractually owe the employee. Discretionary payments and benefits can't be. So benefits in kind aren't included either. Importantly, the employee must be designated as furloughed, and the guidance consistently talks about agreeing that with the employee. So that's in broad terms, that's the scheme. You designate someone as furloughed, you can claim back 80% of the costs up to those caps. What are the conditions of being furloughed? So if you furlough your workforce, then those workers cannot carry out any work for the employer, but they can undertake training. And if they do undertake training, it's obvious that that is likely to be online training. And for that period, they must be paid at least national living wage. Now, it's recognised that payments might go below national living wage if you're only paying it 80%, and that is not a breach of the national living wage. It's not a breach of the minimum wage requirements. But for training, they must be given at least national living wage. A furloughed employee can carry out work for other organisations, and that can be paid or voluntary. So they can earn other money or they can do voluntary work. But, and this changed on Saturday night, we got this clarification, they cannot carry out or associated organisation. Now, what I had seen is some queries whereby there are multiple group companies and clients were saying, well, can I furlough a person and claim back the 80%? Can they then go and work for a sister company or a company connected with us? And my answer had been, well, I don't really see how that's in line with the scheme, but the guidance isn't ruling it out. Well, the guidance does now rule it out, and on Saturday that changed. So a furloughed worker can't work for the organisation or any organisation linked or associated. The furlough period must be 3 weeks at least. That means you can furlough someone, bring them back for a period of time and furlough them again, because the scheme is 3 months from 1st of March. It's unclear whether you can take holidays during furlough. There are various indications that you can. There was a tweet from someone who works at the Treasury who said you can. Various legal minds think you can. ACAS seem to suggest you maybe can for a bank holiday, but they're unclear about other periods. Our advice to clients is don't risk the recovering the furlough by mixing it into a 3-week block, unless and until HMRC clarify that you can take holiday within that 3-week block. Now that it's really not clear at this stage, so as I say, I wouldn't risk not being able to claim it back by having holiday in the middle of it. One of the iterations of the guidance made clear that records have to be kept and maintained for 5 years. Now, what that clearly means is HMRC are building in a period of 5 years whereby they can come and inspect employers, and the conditions in terms of information you have to give HMRC, which are set out in the guidance. I haven't repeated it because I probably haven't got time on the slides, but it's pretty basic information. It's, you know, payroll numbers, it's names, it's periods for which you're claiming, it's amounts you're claiming. There is no justification in that. There is no business case for why you furloughed someone in terms of what you need to submit to get reimbursed. What that means is the HMRC are clearly building in this 5-year period so that if they want to, they can go in and look at a business and say, okay, well, did that person really do no work? Did that person really exist? There's no fraudulent claim here. So it's really important to document with each individual employee the fact that they've been furloughed and the periods that they've been furloughed for and what they're being paid. And I'm going to come on to that later, how you do that. So thinking about who can be furloughed, with each change in the guidance, this has got wider. So initially there was a lot of doubt around who could or couldn't be furloughed, and as I've said, every time they change it, they include more people who can be furloughed. So the starting point, anyone on the payee system who was on the payroll on the 28th of February, except someone who was on unpaid leave on that day and had been before that date as well. I don't really think that's going to apply to many people. Anyone employed on or after 1st of March 2020. Now that it seems a little bit unjust to a lot of people in that new employees are not covered. The thinking, I believe, is that that person can be re-employed by their previous employer, but clearly there's no obligation to do so. And again, I'll come back to that. Public sector employees. So initially, the scheme very clearly stated that it applied to the public sector, and that then got revised. So it was revised on, I think, the 4th of April, where the government said, well, it's not expected that public sector employees would be furloughed, because public sector employees are generally carrying out a service that needs to carry on, and the organisation is generally in receipt of public money that will carry on. What that then raises the question is businesses who receive public funding. Now, what you might have is a situation where the public funding it is going down because it's linked to performance of a contract, that it's staying the same because it's pretty constant, the funding, or it's staying local authority, and your funding goes down based on the services you provide. Well, then if you're not providing the services, the funding goes down, then you can probably build a business case to say, well, we'll furlough those people who are affected. If your funding stays constant and you are not losing out and you're not furloughing people, then you wouldn't expect to be able to furlough and recover public money because you're just carrying out the same services with the same people. If, and this is the more likely scenario, you have a range of individuals who aren't providing work because they are shielding or they have symptoms and they're self-isolating and things like that, but your funding is still constant, then what you need to think about is, well, okay, can I build a case here? Because actually, yes, the funding's constant, but I'm paying that person who's sitting at home and I really need to furlough them so I can afford to employ someone else. And currently we think that's okay, but the guidance on this isn't as explicit as we'd like it to be. What we do expect, though, is if you have to incur further costs because of this situation, even if your public funding is not reducing, that you would be okay. But like I say, that isn't 100% definite. And it can be backdated to 1st of March, and I'll come on to that in a moment. Let's think about some specific cases, whether you can furlough someone or not. Someone on sick leave, self-isolating, shielding, yes, but not if they're on SSP. And the guidance on Saturday night made clear that the employer can decide to move people from SSP onto furlough if they want to, but you can't double recover. Apprentices, yes. Directors, yes. And they can carry out their statutory obligations, but nothing more. So they can't work for the company. They can't provide services or generate income, which is how work is defined. So what we've advised clients to do is to agree a board minute setting out exactly what statutory obligations a director can carry out, but otherwise nothing else because they're furloughed. Someone who transferred under TUPE after 28th of February, yes, that was clarified on Saturday night. So before Saturday, the guidance didn't include someone who TUPE'd, which left a lot of people in limbo, because if someone TUPE'd on the 1st of March to a new organisation, then their employment continued, but they didn't qualify for furlough. That's been changed, and it's been clarified that they are. Caught by IR35. If someone's caught by IR35, then yes, but that only affects the public sector, so that may not count many people, because the IR35 only applies to the public sector at the moment. Employees on a visa, yes, that you can furlough someone on a visa, and that doesn't count as access to public funds. Family leave, yes, and you can reclaim the enhanced pay above the statutory scheme. 0 hours or casual workers, or indeed agency workers, yes, you can furlough those as well. And if someone receives variable pay, then you can use the higher of the same month's earnings from the previous year, or average monthly earnings. So it's not the same calculation we're used to in HR and employment law, which is a 12-week average. It's a different average, but you can undoubtedly furlough anyone who's on 0 or irregular hours. Someone who's left your employment, yes, you can re-employ them and furlough them. And initially it was just thought that applied to someone made redundant, but now it's anyone. So we are seeing a lot of people who started a new job and being told they can't start the job, and going back to their old employer and saying, can I be re-employed and furloughed? And that is absolutely permissible. It's clearly very important to document the terms on which they're being re-employed and furloughed. And as I've said, there's no obligation to do that. So not all previous employers are doing that. What about someone who still works for you but hasn't been working because, we go back a couple of slides, they qualify under one of these things. They've been shielding maybe for a while, or self-isolating. Yes, you can furlough them as long as they would have qualified in terms of what I've just said. As long as they qualify otherwise, then you can decide, okay, Paul's been off shielding since 3rd of March. I'm going to furlough him with effect from that date. But obviously, you'd need to agree that with me, and you'd need to document that. So, talked about the scheme in general, what you can recover and how it works, who can be furloughed. So, okay, how do you furlough someone? So the important point to note is that it's a change in their status. It goes without saying that you need to select people fairly. So what you wouldn't do, to use a silly example, is furlough all the women and keep all the men. You know, that is a silly example, but if you're furloughing people based on either everyone or everyone in a particular department or team or location, that's fine, isn't it? If you're furloughing a certain amount of people within a team, then you need to pick people fairly. You need to select and seek agreement. The guidance talks constantly about agreeing to furlough someone, like I said. It needs to be in writing, and you need to seek consent to furlough. So the risk in not agreeing, as I've said there, and just imposing furlough on someone is probably very low if you're paying 100% pay. The situation changes if you're not, and as I said there, you must document and keep the documentation for 5 years. If you're reducing pay to less than 100%, then the normal employment law rules apply. There is no right under furlough to just automatically reduce someone's salary from 100 to 80%. That means if you are looking to say to someone, I'll furlough you and you'll get the 80%, because that's all I can recover, then that's a reduction in someone's wages. And if you asked me a month ago, can I just reduce my workforce's wages to 80% without their agreement, I would have said no. And if you ask me now, the answer is still no. But the answer in terms of what risk have I got, then maybe the risk profile has changed a little bit, because whereas a month or two ago you wouldn't have expected an employee to agree to that reduction, now you probably do. And we're seeing most employees agree to a reduction where it's being sought. And if the communication's being handled in the right way, and if there's a letter setting out the situation and explaining it in the right way. But it's still really important to seek agreement, because if you don't, you're deducting unlawfully 20% of their wages, you're risking constructive dismissal claims, and if you recognise a union, then obviously consultation and agreements should be with the union, and so you're risking falling out with the union and potentially those individuals. Just thinking about redundancy now. So what I was talking about there, and I know there's some questions about this, is if you make someone redundant, you're going to need to justify that it was fair in all the circumstances and that you had to do it now. So if you end up in an employment tribunal, the judge is going to be saying, one of the things the judge might say is, why couldn't you have furloughed that person? So why couldn't you go through an exercise but then furlough them and make them redundant sometime later? Because it's cost neutral to you. And we think it's going to be quite difficult to justify a redundancy now when you could furlough someone instead, and that is cost neutral. Now, I know it might not be cash flow neutral, and we have had some questions from clients saying, well, I can't afford to pay everyone and then wait to get it recovered, and will I even get it before the end of April, because we've got, you know, a significant amount of time here when people aren't doing any work, and you know, I can't afford the cash flow. There are various loan schemes out there which the government are trying to initiate to help businesses out, and I know that they have their own issues in terms of being able to access that finance, but you would need to have at least decided, you would need to show that you'd explored that funding and you couldn't get that funding, I think. So if you're going to make someone redundant now, whilst furlough is live still, you're going to need to be able to show you can't afford the cash flow. Otherwise, there's a good chance it's going to be unfair, because you could have kept carrying them, you could have employed them and furloughed them. Whether that means someone wins, you know, fast forward 6 months and someone's got an unfair dismissal claim, do they win what they would normally win? And if this hadn't happened, probably not. They might get less money, but we do think there's a significant risk of losing a claim if you make someone redundant now when they could be furloughed. And that doesn't mean you might not say to them, well, okay, but we're effectively pausing this redundancy rather than removing the need to make it. The next bit, I'm nearly done, everyone will be pleased to know, but hopefully we won't have any more technical issues. But a lot of organizations are thinking, well, we're not going to come out of this in the same shape that we went into it in. So, okay, we've got people furloughed, and okay, we're recovering most of that money. But I'm not going to need those 20 people doing that particular function. I might need 5 of them. I don't need 20 of them. I'm not going to need such a big back office team. I'm not going to need certain people to produce that product, because this has changed the shape of the organization, and it's changed the shape of the supply chain and the customer base. And we need to change the shape of our organization. The comments earlier apply equally to this, in that, well, you don't need to make those redundancies now, but the furlough scheme is going to run out, and it was 3 months from 1st of March. It might get extended, but currently it hasn't been. So if you are thinking, right, well, we need to basically restructure or introduce a raft of redundancies, then what you might want to think about now is, how do I go about doing that towards the end of the furlough period? Now, if you think it's going to run till the beginning of June, then a lot of large organizations are thinking, okay, count back 45 days from that, that's 18th of April. Because if you're consulting to make 20 or more redundancies at one establishment, that's a 30-day consultation period with unions or elected reps. If you're looking at 100 or more, that's a 45-day consultation period. And as I say, count back 45 days, that's 18th of April. So there are a lot of organizations putting pressure on the CBI, which is in turn putting pressure on the government to say, are you extending the furlough period or not? Because if you're not, we need to start collective consultation on the 18th of April. I'm not sitting here telling everyone to do that. But clearly, if you think, well, once furlough ends, we need to be looking at restructuring or redundancies, then you need to be thinking about consulting whilst furlough is taking place. So there is nothing in the guidance to say you can or you can't consult with employees during furlough. Our view is that you can, because it's not providing services and it's not generating income. So on the basis that it's not doing those things, it doesn't look like it fits in the category of work which can't be carried out during furlough. So on the basis that you can consult and that you might need to restructure pretty much straight away after furlough ends, we're helping clients think about that now. At the very least, you might think about, well, I need to set up what I'm going to say to the union. I need to elect some employee representatives. I need to tell the workforce what we're thinking. There are very onerous procedures which you have to follow for collective consultation, and there's a 90-day protective award for each employee if you get it wrong. So that's basically 25% of their annual salary. It's worth getting that procedure right, because it's a very expensive one to get wrong. So in conclusion, you need to select people to furlough fairly based on sound business reasons, which I don't want to overplay that risk, but you do need to think about why you're selecting that person and not the person that does the same job. Seek agreement to furlough where you can, document everything. Furlough doesn't mean you can automatically reduce salary to 80%. It's very important to document express written agreement. So without express written agreement, you are underpaying someone and they have a claim for those wages. And when we come out of this, particularly if someone gets made redundant, they're not going to worry about claiming those wages back. And clearly there might be some people who need the money. Most advisors would have a suite of documents. We have one. We have a toolkit that we're helping clients with. So if you're unsure what those agreements and what that documentation looks like, then there should be your advisors should be able to help. And think about consultation now if you're going to reshape your organization coming out of this. Those are my contact details there, and that's the end of the presentation. Thank you, and sorry for the technical issues. If I stop sharing now.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
Does that work now?
Well, yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, apology. We've gained. I managed to find out that you can actually email everybody who's been on this webinar. So I've managed to get a bunch of people back. Lost. So we're close to 3 figures again that when we started. Lots of questions here. Let me scoot back to the beginning and just see. Some of them, like you say, if you think you've answered them, Paul, then do say so. And you've put your contact details down there so people can get in touch with you directly themselves. Okay, so Carmelita, I'm just going to whip through these because we do have a lot and we lost a little bit of time there. But thank you all very much indeed for your questions. Really appreciate it. I've copy and pasted those that have gone to the Ask a Question tab there. Carmelita says, can I set myself up as a self-employed person so I can generate an income as self-employed whilst continuing to be furloughed in my main job?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do other work, yeah.
Does the company have to stop trading totally if they furlough all but one staff?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Sorry, Alex.
Does the company have to stop trading totally if they furlough all but one of their staff? If no money changes hands, is supplying free services while all staff are furloughed not allowed? Two questions.
Yeah, so the second part of that, no, that's not allowed. So you would,
yeah.
What we envisage is the employer having to make some kind of declaration to HMRC saying, yeah, I've complied with the scheme rules. So we anticipate the employer will need to say, these people haven't done any work for me. So even services where you're not getting paid aren't allowed.
Right.
What you don't want to be doing is making a false declaration to HMRC. They're not the sort of people you want to make false declarations to. No. They sort of come back to you. And then in terms of, do we have to close the company if we furlough everyone but one? No, but only that one can do any work.
Right, got you. Okay. Louise says, after furloughing someone, can I make someone redundant, then advertise for a role that includes that role along with another, or do I have to give them that option first, i.e. he is not qualified?
So the normal rules apply. If there's a redundancy in a new job and someone's not qualified, then they don't have to get that job. You have to consider their suitability for alternative roles like you would anyway. Yeah. But I would stress that maybe you don't need to make them redundant whilst they're furloughed. You would just maybe have them sitting there getting the furlough money instead of making them redundant right now.
Okay. Some specific ones. So again, if you don't want to dive into that, can't answer, then understandable. Yolanta says, there is a plan to furlough 4 staff members from one of the departments in my company as the work has been suspended by the client. If there is still no work when the job retention scheme expires, then the department will need to be closed down. What are the mechanics of moving through the steps of furlough to redundancy? There's a lot of those type of questions, aren't there?
Yeah, so that's I guess that's what I was trying to cover towards the end there. That
yeah,
our view is you can consult with employees now. What you would probably do though is consult to make them redundant when furlough ends, and if you really need to make them redundant sooner, then as I say, you'll have to justify why you couldn't have kept them on furlough. And if it's a cash flow point, then equally you'd have to justify why you may be able to pay notice and redundancy payments, but not furlough salary that you can recover. So it's a case of working through those issues, really.
Yeah, and other part to a question was, there is a plan for part of the team from the same department to be put on the furlough screen in the coming days. Does the business need to take the whole department through a selection and consultation process, which is similar to what you just answered, before making the decision on who's going to be furloughed and who won't? I suspect the answer is yes.
I think I would look at furlough and redundancy separately. So if you're looking at who to furlough, we're probably not advising full-on selection procedures, but if you're looking to who to make redundant, then you would. And if you're linking the two things, I guess just be careful on that. Try and keep them separate. And if what you're saying is, can I, in terms of we're going to decide who to furlough now, and that person will then be the one who's made redundant, then yeah, do a normal redundancy selection procedure now. And then essentially what you're saying is, you're furloughed for now, but you're going to be redundant.
Yeah.
But if you're, I'm just looking at that question, Alex.
Okay.
I mean, if there's, you need a sound business reason for furloughing some people in the team and not the others. And if there isn't an obvious selection that's reasonably objective and it just would rely on a subjective assessment, then yeah, you need some kind of selection process.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So the next one is MS says, I was wondering if everyone could be furloughed, including myself. I'm a director of the business. As the business is closed and there's no revenue coming in right now, or does one person need to stay unfurloughed? I can imagine there's a lot of people in a similar situation, hopefully temporarily, but who knows how much longer.
Yeah, and that did change. So initially, it wasn't clear about directors, but yeah, a director can. You could decide. You could decide as a director of the business, right? Okay, I'm going to I'm not going to furlough myself, and I'll work voluntarily. You know, there's normal rules around minimum wage, but you might think, well, look, at the moment I'll just work as a volunteer. So if you want to do that as a director, then you're probably okay. The thing is, you can't then recover the money.
Yeah.
So you can't furlough yourself and recover the money because you're still providing services. If you want to furlough yourself to recover the money, then yeah, you can as a director, and you basically keep an eye on the statutory duties, but you don't provide any of the services.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? So many people are going to be in a similar situation where the knock-on effect of everybody's suppliers has led to zero cash flow, zero income. Yet I know conversations that I've had with people that that people are just waiting for things to pick up again, and then the work's going to start again.
Yeah,
it's like mid to long term, isn't it? Really, but the short term is a struggle.
Yeah.
And that's probably been answered, like you say. Alexis says, can I still volunteer to do some work for my company after I've been furloughed? So no, you can't do that. Jane, as key director of a company that works with freelancers, am I still able to furlough myself if there's only one director working full-time currently if business dries up? I think you answered that as well.
Yeah, that what I just said earlier would apply. Yeah.
Richard, is the furlough payment in one go? I have several employees who have been furloughed at different times and imagine similar when we return. So it could be months before we see the full picture. Can we claim furlough payments on each salary run, which is actually 4 weekly?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
So what we would expect is the pay reference period is what you would claim by. So that if you pay weekly, then you could probably be able to do it weekly.
Okay. Is there any financial support for a restructure or redundancy program given cash constraints?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, me neither. Here we go. Do you, the employer, go ahead and pay a furloughed employee and then reclaim the money? If so, how do you actually claim the money back from the government? If not, how does the furloughed employee get paid? Graham.
Yeah, so you process it. You mark them as furloughed on the payroll. You process the pay to them at the amount that's been agreed, and then you reclaim it through a specific portal that the HMRC are setting up.
Zinnia says, can you reduce the salary temporarily with employee consent for someone with a UK visa where the minimum salary level is set at 30,000?
That's unclear. There isn't an answer to that in the guidance. I would be careful about doing that unless it was clear that that wouldn't breach the visa conditions.
Yeah.
because obviously claiming the furlough money back and reducing the salary are two separate things, as hopefully came through from the presentation. Agreeing to put someone on furlough, fine, you can recover 80% up to $2.5 grand. Reducing the salary, different. That's a different thing altogether, and would need to be agreed. But if there's a visa condition, then my advice would be not to breach that condition unless there are specific rules introduced that say you can do that. And I would probably defer on that to one of my colleagues who in the immigration team, because it's a slightly different team than the employment law team.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Few questions, 2 or 3 people asking. I think that's when we cut out, was just to kind of reaffirm, what is the consultation period for less than 20 employees?
So there isn't one. It's just what's fair in the circumstances. So if you're, I would expect that to take a week or 2.
Okay, that's just a comment from somebody. Another one. Can I become self-employed and invoice my current employee for 25% of my hours, and then can he claim furlough? Need to get my head around that one, Michelle.
If that question is basically trying to find a way of still doing some work whilst the person's furloughed, then no.
Yeah, so I was reading it. So.
Yeah. It might not. Sorry if I've misread that, but that's
yeah, likewise. Yeah. Oh, well, Paul's details are up there. Paul.scope@wardhadaway.com. Very good. Dal, can we make a role redundant and offer an alternative role whilst on furlough and change pay with agreement of the individual?
Can we? Yeah, you can. Yeah. So if if what you're saying is that role's redundant, but there's a new role, will you do that instead? Then yeah. Obviously, there'd be a notice period to end the first role, unless the employee agreed to waive that.
If employees were effectively furloughed before the date of their written agreement, can we claim from the reality date?
Yes.
Yeah. Carly, we obviously don't yet know how long lockdown will continue, but assuming we are still in lockdown at the point of redundancy consultation starting, is it okay to hold these via Skype?
Yeah, I think it probably is. You need to do everything you can to make the redundancy meaningful, the consultation meaningful, and what I wouldn't suggest is that everyone just flouts the government rules and sits opposite each other 2 feet away on the table. Yeah. So I think video conferencing is probably the way forward. That then brings in difficulties, doesn't it, around, well, I want my union there. Well, okay, yeah. Then you need to find a way of setting up a 3-way video call, maybe a 4-way once you get someone to do a note as well, or someone from HR sitting in. So it's, yeah, those are logistical difficulties that will have to be overcome.
That'll be even more bandwidth for all of these platforms.
Yeah. Yeah, the Wi-Fi is going to struggle.
Few more. Does it have to be? That's interesting. Yeah. Any differences for employees with over 2 years service?
So a person with under 2 years service can still claim. If we just think about the furlough point first, they can still claim for that 20% of wages if you haven't agreed that with them. If you're thinking about redundancy, then they can't claim unfair dismissal in their own right if they haven't got 2 years, unless they can link it to discrimination or something. But, you know, the normal unfair dismissal, they can't claim that. But for collective redundancy, that point I've made about 20 or more people, they count towards that number. So it's really what's really important is you don't think, oh, well, I've got 21 short servers for less than 2 years, I'll get rid of them. You know, if you want to do that and the business reasons stack up, then okay, but that would trigger collective consultation if they're going to take effect within 90 days.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Couple of last questions, I think. John, what about paying furlough late if it doesn't arrive by the 28th of April? And then he's got another question just under that as well.
So the scheme envisages that you pay it and then claim it back. So that in reality, I think theoretically that's wrong, but from a practical point of view, I'm not really sure there'd be that much concern. But the individuals would obviously be saying, well, hold on a minute, my mortgage goes out on the 1st of May and things like that. So you probably need to communicate that with them. But what I would stress is the scheme envisages you paying it out and recovering it, not waiting until you get it to pay it.
Yeah.
What else?
You've seen that one just coming from Richard. If we had agency staff working for us on the 28th of February, is the agency duty bound to furlough them? Is there any responsibility for the company where they were working?
So you can only furlough someone if they're on your payroll. So in the agency relationship, obviously being tripartite, agency worker, agency in the middle, and hirer, the hirer has no obligations there. The most obligation a hirer would have is if they'd agreed some kind of minimum term or some notice period before they could get rid of the worker, but that would be owed to the agency, not the worker.
Yeah. The
agency can furlough the worker, but we're seeing agencies start to wonder, well, can we really do that? Agencies have huge payrolls and rely each week on getting the money in. Whether agencies can afford to furlough all the agency workers on their books is a different matter, because that, from a cash flow point of view, that would be quite a large hit, but it would be the agency that does it. Okay.
Rufus has got to go, says thanks very much for the information. Appreciate it. As long as payroll runs, surely it wouldn't matter as much as it's invoice accounting, not cash accounting in a way.
Yeah, I think that's an answer to the agency staff question.
Yeah.
And if the agencies, which most of them do, use invoice accounting, then as long as that should work for them.
Brilliant. Let me just double check the question tab, see if no, we've answered that one about paying furlough late. I think you can go for your lunch, Paul.
Yeah, I've got to have lunch with the kids now. So thanks everyone, and thanks Alex.
Me too. You're very welcome. So Paul's put his details on this thread, guys. I'm going to copy and paste them again now. You can come back. Anyone you think would find this webinar of value, just send them back to the Festival of Enterprise. There you go. Pop that there. I'll send them back to the Festival of Enterprise website, because you can rewatch this as soon as we end it now. The replay will be there, and we're seeing quite a lot of people going back and rewatching the webinars. I'm going to be on again at 2 o'clock. I'm hosting my own webinar, where I think now is a great time to start a podcast for a brand if you're an entrepreneur or a business owner. Lots of opportunities out there using new technology to market your business. So join me at 2 o'clock if you can. If not, thank you, Paul. Hopefully see you again.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, everybody, for joining in today. It's been really good attendance, loads of questions. Thanks a lot, buddy. We got there in the end.
Thanks, Alex. Cheers. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.